Okay, and we're live. So with me today I
Okay.
have Entropic. So hello and welcome.
Okay. Hi.
I figured today we would be talking about, well, starting off talking about typology and then hopefully moving on to some other topics if we find the time. But so to begin, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started with typology, what resources you first focused on, and how that developed over the years?
Okay. I first got in contact with typology through the MBTI. So I was active on this forum called Last FM. There was this group of people that I used to hang out with because we kind of share the same music tastes. And then one person found out some free MBTI tests that we all took it, and they were like, "Yeah, that's kind of stupid." But sure, fun but stupid kind of thing. Then after a while, like a couple of years later, I think I began to think more about it and I got more interested. So I googled about the MBTI, and I pretty much uh, joined Personality Cafe because that's like one of the first hits that you find when you like Google about the MBTI. And yeah, that's pretty much it, I guess. So I just was active. I've been active on Personality Cafe for like the past years and 2014, I think. 2012, 2014, something like that.
So did you start off more from like a cursey perspective, or were the resources you first started out with?
Oh yeah, I think like everyone else, I pretty much started out with the dichotomies. And then I got like INTP on the MBTI test. So obviously I went to the INTP forum first, and then people began discussing the functions. And after a while, I realized I don't really relate to TI so much. I'm more like an FI type, but I didn't understand the theory so well, so I was thinking more like an eight function model where it can be like an INTP and FI at the same time. Like people start out that way when they don't know so much. Um, and then I slowly moved away from a dichotomist perspective because I thought it was actually pretty shallow in retrospect. Like it didn't say so much. Um, and then I got more interested in Jung because people obviously brought up Jung and a Jungian model. I got some books. I read parts of psychological types and stuff outside psychological types as well, like some collective works on anima, for example, and stuff like that. Um, then I kind of moved, tried to do an enneagram, so it didn't really stick with me in the sense that I got it. It took a lot of time for me to get it. Um, I own and I read quite a few books on the enneagram. My favorite is probably Spiritual Dimension by Maitri, but I also really like Helen Palmer in retrospect. Like it took a while for me to get it, but after I did, I actually appreciate it. Um, then moved on to sociologics, and now I pretty much only deal with sociologics. Um, and that's Wikisocial, I guess, because there aren't that many English sources for sociologics outside of Wikisocial and whatever is translated there.
Okay, but so you kind of had a interactive. You learned a lot via the community, as to say. Then, so it's kind of been a.
Yeah, in a way, I learned like I'm not like a scholar in the sense that I like learned the subject first by reading about and then I went to discuss it, but it's more like I learned by interacting with other people.
Yeah, yeah, okay, yeah. I'm the same, so that's interesting.
Yeah,
All right. So, what would you say that the? You said you had a hard time understanding the enneagram. So let's just start there. And what would you say that the core of the enneagram is? As in, what is it really trying to capture or to shed light on, and contrast that
yeah,
with MBTI or socionics or whatever.
yeah. The thing about the enneagram is that the enneagram, in a sense, requires a deeper self-understanding than the MBTI or even socionics does. Like socionics is, or the MBTI for a matter, It's more about how you process information on a more general plane. Like it's more about how you like categorize your world. Like when you understand, you always like categorize it a certain way. So it's more about that kind of categorization. It makes it a little bit more shallow. It's not really as personal and a part of your history that the Enneagram is. And because I think, especially in online communities, people approach the Enneagram the same way they do the MBTI or socionics. They don't really like get the depth so much of the system. Like it's more about finding yourself and who you really are as a person, what really makes you tick and click. Like mm, in the sense like your greatest grievances or what brings you the most happiness. Those things. Like it's more like, I mean, spiritual isn't wrong to say, even if you don't endorse the fact that the Enneagram is spiritual, it is in a way connecting to your inner spiritual nature, or however you want to call it. And the MBTI socialists, they don't do that. They don't care about the spiritual world. It's just logical. It's more about categorizing your own way of thinking. The Enneagram is much deeper than that. And that's why it took a lot of time for me to really get it. Because when you try to approach it as another category, you really kind of lose out on the kind of like the point. Because in a way, I think like the point on the Enneagram is even less about figuring out the type. It's not so much that you are a certain type. Like it's meaningful to know that you are, because it can help you to put a name on a lot of your experiences. But the Enneagram is much more about placing yourself in that perspective. Like um, a little bit like stepping back and see that you as a person, it's not that you don't have value, because you do, but it's more like you as a person, that like you are one small bit in a much larger universe kind of thing, not in a belittling kind of way or in a way that you're insignificant. It's more like you are part of something bigger than yourself, um, in a more spiritual kind of way. And that can really take a lot of time to see. It requires a lot of self-awareness and self-development. And that's really like the point of the Enneagram. Like I have, as a person, I have grown a lot more um, by understanding the Enneagram and then trying to understand myself through the Enneagram than I have the MBTI or socionics.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. That the Enneagram is far more useful for personal development and just finding out what flaws you have in general. I don't really think the MBTI does a lot in terms of teaching you how you go about the way you do wrong. Like it's not really that much about that. But
Yeah,
I wonder, when it comes to fixes and the splits of how the Enneagram is split, where do you stand on fixes? Like let's say, I mean, tri-type is one way
I
of
mean,
doing the
yeah. So
split,
I was
but
thinking if you want to try that. Yeah, personally, I'm not entirely sure why people are against tripod. Like I can understand in the sense that they think it's kind of superfluous, and I agree. But on the one hand, I also find tripod useful, um, because I do think it helps to create a bit more nuance. Like you don't need it, but if you do want the nuance, I think tripod helps to add that layer, just like wind theory does or subtype theory. Like you don't need it, but if you want that additional nuance, I do see merit to the tripod theory.
do you subscribe to the specific things written about tri-type, or do you kind of take them with a big grain of salt? You know, like the tri-type descriptions, or do you more just view it as it makes sense to have a fix in each center? Like,
Yeah, I think I'm more like it just makes sense. Like for example, in tri-type theory, I think of myself as an 845 tri-type. Because one of the things that when I got into the Enneagram initially, one of the things I really knew right away after reading about all the types was that I related to type 4. Like I don't relate to type 3 or 2, that's not me at all, but I know that I have like a lot of type 4 issues or however you want to call it, as a fixation or whatever. Like I really related to that. A lot of people that know me also tend to say like, if you're not an 8 or whatever, you will be a 4. I kind of agree with that. If I didn't type as a type 8 as I do now, I would type as a 4 probably, or maybe a 9, because those are the two types I kind of like relate to the most after type 8. Like I can see like a lot of things that I do and the way I think are like related to those two types. Um, so and after that it's more like process of elimination. I don't really put as much stock in triad type descriptions, and I think the reason for that is because when you try to like combine so many different things, like you have like 3 different types and subtype theory and wings, you get so complex and nuanced that there's just no way you can like write a more general but still kind of on point description of such a person,
Yeah,
because it's just too complex.
yeah, I totally agree. How do you stand on say um, if we step away from like having being really god heavy or being really image heavy, so you have a lot of 8, 9 and 1 as an example, because that's how I feel personally. Aside from 4, I have a lot of 4 as well, just as you do, but besides from 4, I'm very clearly, I see a lot of 1, 9 and 8 in myself. So how do you stand on that, like being really heavy in one of the senders?
Yeah, I kind of relate to that because I don't really feel like I have a strong connection to the head, like to the head, the triad,
Yeah, I'm the same.
personally. I also find that the more I like to get to know myself, the more I also experience that it is kind of like a weak spot, because a lot of the problems that I have, especially the personally, is that, or even when it comes to like general decision making, is that I'm really really bad at just like stepping back a little bit and stop to think what it is I'm really doing and what I'm going to go through, and what the risks are. Yeah, that kind of thing. Like the stuff head types do pretty much. Like they always like sit and think about first what you are going to do and what the risks are. And I don't really do that. Like I don't really self-doubt myself, for example. Like I don't really doubt my decisions, whether it's the right thing or not, whether it's good or bad. Like sixes do, for example. And I can see in retrospect that I could do a bit more on that, because sometimes I do things that are kind of rushed because I dislike this feeling of not moving forward. Like gut types have all this need that they want to move forward, that they want to do something, and that sometimes gets me into problems with people or just decisions that I make in general, because they're not really thought through, and I could achieve a better result if I step back a little bit and wait and then thought a little bit more about what it is I'm going to do.
What is your reaction like if you're put in a position where you actually have to, or well, someone forces you to like do a lot of details beforehand, or detailed planning or stuff like that? Like, what is your emotional reaction to that?
It depends on the kind of detail planning it is, I guess. Because I mean, there's also this part, like it's also not sociologist or whatever. I type as an INI, so in a way, I have like great capacity to think about the future and future consequences. Like I understand very well that if I do X, you would have Y, B, whatever outcome from this, stuff like that. I understand that very well, like the process of I don't know how to say, the process of development when you make a decision, and then from there how that decision in turn and so on branches out into this like infinite myriad of options and variations, based on one decision that you did right now in the present moment, kind of thing. Like I understand that very well. I think it's more like I don't really like to think about. I don't even know how to differentiate this exactly. It's more like I don't really self-doubt myself or my capacity, or consider whether I have enough resources when I have this like attitude of feeling very self-assured. Like
Hmm.
if I'm going to do this. I had this attitude that I know I'm gonna do it, even if perhaps I actually don't. But I have this kind of self-bias that I can always accomplish what it is that I want if I just put enough like effort and will into it. Except sometimes it doesn't really work that way, because I don't really second guess or self-doubt myself and my actions and what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. So once I have decided on a certain course of action, and I do that more like logically in the sense that, if I do this, it's gonna lead to that and that and that and that kind of thing. But I never question the initial reason why I do it. I'm not sure if that's answering your question.
Well, not quite, because like say that someone you are with someone who really needs that heavy planning, so they sit around and like forces you to interact with them and plan something in great detail. Do you just get frustrated and annoyed, or do you actually get like anxious from all the extra, like what is your reaction to it, like your emotional reaction to having to like sit through a bunch of things you normally just never would do?
I think sometimes after a while, like I feel kind of frustrated in the sense that like I feel like it's a lot of going around in circles, a lot of self-doubting. But what if this? What if that? And at some point, to me, it's just like, okay, well, I can understand all these worries and all these concerns, but you will never know unless you do something, unless you take a decisive action and just do it. I mean, as like a proverbial uh, looking ahead before you jump kind of thing. It doesn't matter if you stand there on the edge and you try to measure how far it is down, you do practice jumps to know if you're gonna make it across or whatever. Like you can do all these preparations all day, or think about, if I fall down, when I get back up, can I survive this big of a fall or whatever. You like, no matter how much you try to plan, you will never know how 100% that you are gonna make the jump across until you actually jump. All this thinking, like, it doesn't really get you anywhere.
No.
Like, like it can make yourself and like it can make you feel safe and secure. Like it's not as dangerous as you thought it would. But you will never actually know until you actually jump. And sometimes that can be a little frustrating when I have to deal with people like that, because it's like, okay, let's just do it. Let's jump and see what happens.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And also, the more time you spend not jumping, the less time you have to actually learn from it. You actually need to jump to learn anything from it. Planning isn't going to teach you all that much.
Yeah, I mean, you won't really learn until you do it. So, I mean, in a way, practice makes perfect or whatever. Like, the more times you do it also, then less likely you are to be gonna be scared of that activity.
How do you view, so you would say, of course, that the head types are the ones usually that need to pre-plan, but what about the sevens?
Yeah, sevens are they're a bit interesting in the sense that they're on the edge of the gut, but they're still a head type. So I think on surface level, sevens can seem kind of more action oriented because they really want to try and do different things. But the reason they want to do that is because sevens have this, just like sixes and fives do, that they have this sense of the world is very imminent, and their own like sense of being like the end is coming for them. They don't know when they're gonna die. This is this very terrifying fear inside of them that they will die soon, and they don't know when it is, but they know for a fact that they are gonna die. And this is why sevens have this kind of frantic, gluttony, like they want to taste everything, try everything. Like they don't want to be stuck in one spot because there's this fear of missing out unless they go and try that thing. It's like, I was like watching YouTube while at work, like kind of bored, and there's this cooking show, whatever, this guy, he travels like all around the world to like try all this like weird cuisines, stuff that normal people wouldn't really want to eat or find kind of odd or strange. Like he was really into that, but he hated, American cuisine, like traditional, old traditional known cuisine. He wasn't interested in that. He wanted everything that was new and interesting, novel. And I was thinking, like, this guy, he seems like a type 7 because he has this idea, like, you want to try everything. It's not even about the depth of experience, more like a breadth of it. Like, he just wants to try everything. Kind of makes it exciting because he keeps his mind off the fact that the universe is permanent, and like that is not permanent. Like there's a fear of that everything is gonna go under, and then you lose everything and you die, and that's it. Like all head types had this fear of death in a way, and the other types just don't.
I think this leads pretty nicely into when we talked a little bit before. You said that you don't really like it when people draw very strong correlations between MBTI and Enneagram, that only certain MBTI types can be a certain Enneagram. But the way you just described sevens, anyone who listens to it will immediately think about NE and SE DOMs. So how exactly, like, how do you see the correlation? Like, do you think there's none, or like, how would you try to express the correlation between MBTI and the Enneagram?
Yeah, I think like it's a bit more complex than what people kind of like when they ask this question. Is there any correlation between the two? Because it's kind of wrong to say there isn't a correlation. Because obviously, if you have like say an ESTP or whatever, and there are type 7, there are gonna be correlation within an individual, and it's going to make sense when you look at them between the cognition, like the MBTI part, and the Enneagram part. Like it's kind of intertwined in that person to make sense to them. Because if it wouldn't, it would be like a very psychic, unstable individual. Like it wouldn't make any sense. It would be like all this kind of inner conflicts in that person, so they wouldn't really be stable or fully functional. So it will make sense for them, but I don't think like there are larger correlations in the sense that most sevens are SC DOMs or NE DOMs or whatever like that. Because then you're looking at behavior, like you're looking at general attitudes and behavior that people do, and when you do that, you lose out on the meaning of the Enneagram. Like there is a lot of behavior to the Enneagram, I agree with that, but it's not just that you do something in the Enneagram, but it's why you do these things, which is why sometimes can seem very, like some people can be very completely different types than they think that they are, because the reason why they act that way is not because they are the type you think they are, but for a very fundamentally different reason. And then you have like the cognition part too. Like sure, you can say there is some kind of behavior aspect to cognition, because even though we can like be mind readers in that sense when we type people, like, or vibes or whatever we are going off, we are basing that on micro expressions and the way people express their own thinking. That's something concrete, and like a literal pattern that you can categorize in a way. But still, when we look at cognition, cognition is how about people categorize their own world, how they describe it to other people or approach it. Like for example, an SDOM, they're more likely to look at things very literally, in a very as is kind of manner. Things just kind of are, in a way. And when you take that, like the way SDOMs think and approach to this whole idea of novelty, you cannot see that there is nothing about these things that actually join them together. There's nothing about seeing the world exactly as it is in an SDOM that has anything to do with novelty, seeking novelty. And then an SDOM can also be an interest in seeking novelty, like say an ESTP 7 or whatever. But that doesn't mean there is a correlation between SC and 7 as in itself. It just means that that particular person has an existential condition, and they also happen to be a type 7 in the Enneagram. So that's kind of like how I see it.
But would you say that, do you see the Enneagram as something that develops or something that is innate from birth?
Yeah, that's a good question because I don't really think there is a yes no answer to that. I think people are kind of predisposed. There's a lot of research that suggests that personality is to a very large degree inborn. Like they had this study on uh, twins that are separated from birth, and it turns out that both twins tend to develop like very similar personalities, like if they're monozygotic. Um, but then again, it's kind of wrong to say that the environment doesn't play any part in it either. So the way I kind of think of it is like that people that kind of have these personalities or personality traits that are predisposed, but they will only really develop them if there is like a right kind of trigger in the environment. Um, and I think some of that applies to the enneagram, some of that applies to the cognition, some of it applies to some to stuff that's not related to any of those.
Okay, because the way I'm thinking about this is, if you say that your MBTI is kind of more nature, like predominantly nature, it's mostly, then isn't that going to affect how you adapt to the world? If the Enneagram is a little bit more adaptive, so say an NE or SE dom is far more likely to turn to a 7 kind of complex to respond to whatever it is, while someone introverted is more likely to go to say 1, or like don't you see there's a possibility of there being
Yeah, you
patterns
mean like
because of
that?
this?
Yeah. Well, and then you kind do assume that the enneagram is entirely environmental.
Well, not
Um,
necessarily entirely, but there's a larger component of environment in the
yeah,
Enneagram, I
I
would.
think, yeah, I think to me, the way I see it anyway is that there's about 50-50 for both of them. Because I don't really think there is no definite study. I don't even think it's possible to do that kind of study as of right now, where you can like say exactly what is environmental and what is not, with regards to both the enneagram and the MBTI. Like if I think back on my own life, for example, I don't really think like in many ways I think like who I am is simply just something I was predisposed to. Like some of these things, yeah, I can see maybe my environment has something to do with it, and my environment definitely has something to do with the way I developed, in the sense that you can talk about being more healthy or unhealthy or stuff like that. But outside of that, I don't really think I would be different, even if I was placed in an environment outside of how I kind of like approach that journey in itself. But I feel like a lot of the traits that I have are still kind of innate in a way. Like I wouldn't really be different either way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I do think it makes sense, and I largely agree. I mean, I think that the way we respond is dependent on our nature. As so, like, if you weren't predisposed to say wanting to be great, then you wouldn't adapt in such a way. You would probably
Yeah,
withdraw instead of try to capture
yeah, or
that need
yeah,
you
or
have.
yeah. Like I think like say, let's say we could take a type 3, like you want to be like a successful person. The thing about type 3s is that they're very adapted to the environment. Like the motivation to be successful is. Which is why there can be a great variation in type 3s in a way that is usually not recognized in literature, because most literature is so biased towards like American capitalism and however you want to put it. And within American capitalist culture, then there is a way a person is successful is to be materially successful, to be the top of the economic ladder in some way. But it doesn't mean there are other ways to be successful. Like I have a type 3 friend, and his idea of being successful is to be good at video games. which is kind of like, almost antithesis of society's idea of how you should be successful. And the reason he's like that is because his mother only praised him for his video games. When he came home and said, "Hey, I won this video game tournament, whatever," then she praised him. So obviously for him, that became kind of important and significant in a way it wouldn't be for a different type 3 that say got praised for the school grades or whatever.
How much do you think the culture of a a nation or whatever affects the expression of the Enneagram?
Yeah, that's another thing I think, not just the Enneagram, but also like the MBTI or whatever. I think that's something that's also very, very overlooked. Like, we're both, like, it kind of helps that I know you're Scandinavian, but like, like Scandinavian cultures, especially Sweden, that I'm from, and Finland, like, they're very, very introverted. Like when they compare to like American culture, that's very, very socially extroverted. I'm not entirely sure how it's like in Finland because I actually haven't really been there. But at least in Sweden, it's also very conflict avoided as a culture and as a society. And there's a lot of passive aggression as a person that you should be like. Like you don't really create open conflict necessarily with people. And obviously these things kind of like, these are culture values that become ingrained in you, or in the same way that there's an attitude that you shouldn't really make yourself into too much of a special person, like to some special kind of person, like you're outstanding, a little bit better than the rest. Like that kind of attitude is also very disowned. Which would, at least from the Enneagram point of view, be a fundamental type 3 kind of attitude. So it's kind of like, you can say like Swedish culture is anti-type 3. So how would a type 3 person then be like in a Swedish culture? They would probably not look the same way like you expect a type 3 person in American culture, where, like I said, materialism, make yourself into something special and big, is much more valued than it is in Swedish culture. And I think for me, like one of the things that made it difficult for me, for example, to realize I was an Enneagram Type 8 is precisely because of culture attitudes and culture values. Like you're probably familiar with the Type 8s are described to be very aggressive, imbalance, all these things. And I'm socially introverted firstly, so I couldn't relate to that person. But I'm also kind of grown up with the idea that you shouldn't be an aggressive person. And then I have like a family that was with a father in particular that I kind of like admired a lot as a kid. Like I wanted to be like him, and he's a Type 9. So you can kind of see that when you adopt these attitudes and these values, it becomes something different, because my idea way was not, I did not see myself as an aggressive person because I was not taught to be aggressive or raised in a way that would like value those kind of traits. So I never ever even considered or thought that to be a possibility. Like I couldn't identify or relate that to myself. So I kind of repressed that a lot. And I think that's kind of like a problem sometimes when you have like cultures, like you need to like disentangle who you are versus who you are taught to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and actually the 8s I know here are not aggressive at all. Like
Yeah,
I know a Swedish 8, an INTJ, and then I have an ENTJ friend as well who's an 8, and they're both very passive people. Like they're not in any way outright aggressive. Actually, I'm far more aggressive than they are because I have a bad temper. So, but like, yeah, so I do think that culture seems to play a big role in a lot of it.
yeah,
And Swedish culture actually, to me, it seems very, everything is good in Sweden. Like that's the attitude you're supposed to have in Sweden.
yeah,
Like everything is good. And in Finland, it's pretty much the opposite, that nothing is ever good. Like,
yeah. The little experience I have with Finnish culture is that it's like very, very like in the Enneagram sense, it's a very type 4-ish culture. It's a lot of like melancholy, a lot of longing, that kind of stuff.
yeah, but then again, you're not supposed to complain in Finnish culture. Like, Finnish culture is, if you sum it up, it's basically you're supposed to work hard and shut up. That's basically Finnish
Yeah,
culture. Yeah. So,
yeah,
and so not really for either. Kind of, I'm not sure. Some kind of introverted. I don't know. 1-ish, 9-ish, 4-ish blend. I don't know really. Like,
yeah,
it's kind of a. But yeah, I do think culture does seem to play a big role in how different. Maybe not as much MBTI though. I don't quite see as much of a difference there in how it's expressed, I have to say. But definitely Enneagram, there seems to
yeah,
be
yeah.
a big difference.
Yeah, on the MHI, like just mentioned that, I do think so. Like at least based on my own personal experiences, especially since I've been dealing with sociology a lot, and then in sociology they have this thing about quadras, which if you translate it to the MHI, people that share the same functions, they belong to the same quadra because they share the functions together. So it means that even though they're like different people in some way, like an ENTP is different from an ESFJ, like both are introverts, both share the same functions, but one is an NT, one is an SF, all that stuff. Um, they kind of like have similar attitudes to social values or how to socially interact with people. And one thing I've been thinking about is that when you come across people that are like, FP types, in at least Scandinavia. Not as much in Norway, but at least in Sweden and definitely Finland is that I experienced that, especially FB DOMs. They have like a much more low key kind of FE, compared to like something like American culture where they're much more embodiment. And I feel like the reason for that is because American culture in itself is more like it promotes kind of FE kind of style of interaction. So if you are an FE type, it enhances that. Whereas like in Sweden, it's almost you should be more like an FE type and like an FI, not FE but FI type. So even FE types seem more like an FI type, because that's just how they are encouraged to be like.
Yeah, no, I agree. At least in Finland, I would say that the beta quadra values and kind of mode of expression is really devalued. Like, it's not really
Yeah,
beta quadra is not fit for Finland in the slightest. Like, the whole beta quadra is kind of exaggerative, and we like to exaggerate things. It's
yeah,
and that's really not Finland even in the slightest. So yeah, no,
yeah,
in that sense I do agree. Yeah, that those impulses are, you learn to withhold them and probably express them in some more appropriate way. So like
yeah,
pessimism in Finland, and so yeah, no, I would no, I definitely agree with that. But let's move up to the instincts, because I think that's where people are the most confused with Enneagram, are
hmm
the instincts. So
yeah.
what's your perspective on the instincts?
Well, to be honest about it, first of all, I think people like uh make instances such a big thing that is almost what I call bullshit. Like I don't really buy into the subtype theory. I just gonna put it out there. A lot of people think it's really interesting and all that stuff, but I have a lot of beef with the subtype theory, and it's not because I think the instincts in themselves are bullshit, but I just don't think it's that simple. Again, I guess like to me, I think of the instincts are very, very simple in themselves, but I also think they don't really are as important as the people make them out to be, to the point where we can talk about, we have this entire subtype system. Like I can understand why people find it interesting to discuss at some level, but I also don't understand why we must constantly have this, at least in online communities like Typology circles. It's always like, I'm an SX type 1 or I'm an SP type 5, as if putting that in a disclaimer of your instincts is somehow going to mean a little bit more than if you said you were a type 1 or a type 5. And it kind of goes back to my disagreement or argument or whatever, that I think people in general online on typology circuits tend to like focus too much on the behaviors. And again, I kind of understand that because it's kind of simple to do. Because when you learn something new, you tend to focus on the behaviors first because it's something very concrete and easy to think about. It's not nearly like it's not as abstract as the actual theory in itself. It's just not the time to get to the abstract stuff. But after a while, it just kind of overinflates itself. So people try to like explain everything with subtype theory about who they are when they could just say, you know, I'm a type 1, and it would really speak for itself.
So you don't think that the instincts are really a big part of, they don't add that much information really?
No, they don't. Like, I mean, I do think there's a correlation in the sense that the instincts do affect, like, the way, like, your core issues of a type goes to. For example, like, if you're an SX type, no matter what type you are going to take the core issues of that type and focus them on SX stuff. So let's say a type 3, for example, like the SX, they will likely in some way try to emulate what they think is the perfect partner to be like the perfect, like how to have the perfect sex, how to be the most attractive, and so on. Or like a type 7, and they will always try to like find the most novel ways to be like, you know, what's the most fun relationship to have, how can we change the way we see like relationships, sexual relationships. Like I think like if we like gonna be very stereotypical, I don't say that this is like this is true for every 7 or whatever, but like, you know, stuff like being polysexual or pan-romantic, like, you know, sexual orientations or sexual attitudes that are not really like fit in a box. I think that's more like a type 7, like SX type 7 kind of thing. But they can also be like the opposite, you know, like connection to type 1. So they can be like very dramatic, like you should only have one partner kind of thing if the community, for example, would value being more like open-minded or whatever.
Aren't you kind of ascribing a lot of direction to the SX instinct here, though, that like somehow it knows what it's like? Obviously, as a person, you don't really know what if we say that it's a need, some kind of need for a connection or a need. I mean, that can be understood and expressed in so many different ways. So it might not even have to be sexual, or
no, I
not even necessarily relational so much. I mean, it can get really twisted though. So isn't it kind of ascribing a little bit too much direction to it to express it like that?
I think, like I said, I think the instincts are really simple nowadays. Like, if I had to summarize like how I think on the SX is like, it's like really about like, I wanted to say mating, but it's about like seeking intimacy in relationships, and that intimacy, it can, like, if you want to be like really biological about it, okay, then you go say it's about mating. But I don't really like that because I think it's too simplistic. So I nowadays I kind of stick with an idea of intimacy. Like it's physical intimacy and it's emotional intimacy, and you want it really like really deeply. Like you go for like 1 to 100 right away, because you want that intensity kind of. And that's pretty much it. The way I think of SX, and that can apply to a partner, like romantic. It can be platonic. It can be towards family. Whereas social is more global, it's more about friends, society, and the connection that you have, and what's happening in society. Like gossiping, politics is like social stuff, and then you have self-press. It's more about material and physical survival. It's about having a home, having money, having food. So I don't know, I think it is very simple.
Would you say that the SO then kind of correlates to being the most intellectual, in that it cares the most about influencing society or people as a whole?
Yeah, I actually agree with that. like on my Facebook, I have a couple of people that I know are probably as social doms, like they SO first. And one thing that's very typical about them, and that makes them stand out from my other friends that I have, is that they are extremely interested in politics. Many of them are or have been politically active, but it's not just that. They like to post about stuff that affects society way more than other people do. Like they constantly updating my Facebook feed about some social commentary someone else made that you don't know who the fuck it is, but they think is important to their causes or their views. Um, they also like to engage in that interaction, obviously, like what's happening in the social public space. Um, in general, they just like to be in a kind of know-how what's happening out there in society, what's holding it together, who is related to who. They have a very good understanding of social groupings, which I think is a kind of overlooked part of the social instinct. Like, like they talk about camps, like for example, like or tribes or whatever. Like if you go in the sociology, we can talk about social tribes. Like we can talk about the Democrats, like a social party, or something like that. Like their social groupings to understand that. Like whenever a person has like a social identity, for example, like to say, uh, I'm a liberal left kind of person, or I believe in gay rights kind of thing. They make these social statements in relation to the social realm. That's a part of the social instinct.
So would you say then that most likely SOSP are the most tribal in a way?
I actually think the most tribal are SOS6 types in a way.
Oh.
Like, because they have this Essex instinct, like they want to be intimate. They want to feel intimate with the group. SP types, they're more like a bit more. Like there's this whole syn flow, counter flow theory about instincts.
No, I'm not familiar with that.
No, yeah, it's a bit like well, this is like floating around on the internet, kind of obscure. Sometimes pops up in some instincts discussions. But anyway, the idea is that SOSX, I don't think now SXSP, and SO, yeah, and they're like syn flow. So they always move towards other people, whereas the other three, SXSO, SOSP, and SPSX, I think I got those right now, I have to think. They're contraflow, so they go against people. Because they kind of separate the groups. And I do think there is some legitimacy to that. I think people don't really understand exactly what it means when they really talk about it. Uh, but I do think there's legitimacy to what I observed. So the SOSX will be the person that is more towards groups because they have this like the sexual energy or instinct. They want to be like more intimate, to be close. They want to feel like they really belong and be a part of the group, because it's still kind of supporting the social instinct. Whereas, for example, like you can take like an SXSO, they're more like they identify a group, but within that group, they try to find one or a few people that they really, really want to be like very close to, like really bond with them. So it becomes more uh, like a division there. Whereas they're not really a part of the entire group. They're more like singling out a couple of people that they think are important and they want to be very close to because of their sex instinct.
All right. Let's move a little bit over to socionics and MBTI. So you favor socionics. Why is that? And what kind of led you down that path?
Yeah, I favor socionics, and it kind of happened very naturally because over time I become more and more dissatisfied with the MBTI. And the problem with MBTI is that the theory is very, very broad. On the one hand, you have the dichotomies and the MBTI tests, but then on the other hand, you have Doronati with the functions and neuroscience, and even when you go into the function theory, then you have Jung, but then you have like other theories like Lenore Thompson, Donald Nordy, Linda Berens, what is written even on the official MHI site, and these descriptions sometimes don't match. Like they try to like cover the same thing, but there is so much discrepancy between all these views and these opinions that you just get like this kind of like very structured theoretical mess of it. Like it is a theory, but it's not really complete, and it doesn't feel integrated. Like every part is actually integrated and part of something that is whole, which is why in the professional world they pretty much given up on the functions. It's too complex and too messy, so they just stick with the dichotomies. You got this on the test, okay, good. Now you're a T or you're a P person kind of thing. Because it's easier that way than talking about your TI or your TE, even though that's kind of like the basis of it. And that's one of the things where I feel socionics does what MBTI wants to do and wants to be, but it does it so much better because everything is integrated in socionics. And even though you have some theories and yeah, there are theoretical disagreements or disparate developments, you still have a very solid core theory. And even though it takes more time to grasp because it is more abstract from the get-go, and once you get there, it also feels more rewarding because it gives you a lot more to work with. And it explains a lot of things the MBTI kind of like stumbled upon, but it doesn't really know what to do with it. Like, for example, we can take stuff like JP in the MBTI. A lot of the stuff when it comes to JP, you actually have explained pretty well in socionics. Like you have the IP, IJ temperaments, for example, or it overlaps sometimes with the raining traits. So it's like that nuance helps to create a better idea of what you're actually dealing with instead of having this kind of very big blob with information, but it is very ambiguous in the end and it doesn't say nearly as much as I think it does.
To what degree do you subscribe to the, let's say, specifics of socionics, e.g., the information elements and whatnot? Like, how much do you question the structure of it, and how accurate it actually is, and how much do you just think it's pretty much nailed down?
Okay, yeah. I think IEs are useful. I mean, that's kind of the bending about. You don't really get sociology without the IEs, but then you also need the model A, because you don't really get model A without the IEs. It doesn't say anything really. So those two are like the core foundational things that you need. But then obviously you have stuff like subtype theories. Not as fond of those. I feel like both Gulenko subtypes like DCNH, but also the other one, when have like creator subtype versus base something like contact and inert, that logic. I kind of feel like yes and no on that one. It's a little bit too behavioral and a little bit too stereotype for me to feel like I really subscribe to it anymore. Even in that sense, I feel like this NH does a better job because it doesn't necessarily try to explain it in relation to model A like this one does. Then you have like other models like model B, model D, stuff like that. I haven't really got so much into it because I never found it that interesting. Yeah, the intertype part, that's something I feel that the MBTI does in a way that I feel like especially the professional MBTI, like they wanted to try that, like they do it, but they didn't really get around doing it all that well. And that's something I think socionics does really well and that I enjoy thinking about. And I would say that's also very much a core part of the theory. I don't really think there is much else. If there is, I probably haven't really thought about it because it's not all that relevant, I think.
Okay, but so generally speaking, you really like the structure of what the function does in the place it is.
Yeah, it does. And obviously sometimes you can say, yeah, that doesn't make sense, or it's not right. But I think of it that way that I don't really think of the system as hard fact rule. And when you think of it that way, it becomes a little bit easier to like it tries to describe various like archetypes or patterns or whatever that you observe in people, and it's a lot about simply just best fit kind of scenario. Sometimes you find people that seem to be a little bit on the fence, could be either way, like between being extroverted and uninterrupted, for example. But then you kind of try to like just gauge in the end what are they really good at. Uh, um, I haven't really come into a situation where I think it doesn't make sense. So
How do you feel about in like, so you like the quadras, as far as I understood, right? You think the quadras are a good part of socionics, right?
yeah, I
Yeah.
really like the corners.
Yeah. So I'm the same there. But how do you feel then about, say, if you have a heavy introverted ISTP or INFJ as an example, would it
Mm.
not make sense for them to then stack as TINI or NITI? How do you, or
Oh,
does
you
that?
mean like an SNI
Yeah,
or
yeah,
NSI?
yeah. But like to uh,
Well,
that that it I mean, I guess in socionics it doesn't really make a difference because of how the roles or what the
yeah.
of the placement. But like in a traditional MBTI stacking,
MSI like okay, you
to
mean
switch it up there.
like the loop theory.
No, not
Honestly,
really loop theory. I meant more like, because in the loops are kind of seen as a negative, and I'm thinking of it more as a constant, because obviously the loops are something you should get out of and blah blah blah.
okay, yeah.
But
Well,
clearly people can be heavily introverted and not heavily introverted by nature, and so doesn't it make sense if you're
okay,
heavily introverted that you'll engage your TI a lot more than your FE as an INFJ as an example? And where do you stand
yeah,
on that kind
yeah.
of?
Sure. I think that's possible, but to me, I think it's more like if we have like an T add-on that uses NI a lot, that kind of begs the question: then are they like an ISP? So they have like their sensor, or are they really like an INTP? Because they're actually using intuition. Um, and then you have to look at everything else, like the bigger picture. So how good is their use of NI, for example? Do they seem like an intuitive type? I mean, there are ISPs out there that like they really kind of like try to jack off that NI like nothing else. But the thing is also when they do that, you can kind of tell when you observe that they're not really all that good at it. Because by virtue of being an ISP, they will not be good at it. And that's kind of the thing also, that frequency, like I have this thing where I say frequency of use is not the same as skill of use. So a person can use a function a lot, and it doesn't mean that they're actually good at it. Like, I probably use F5 more, maybe as a whole, than I do TE sometimes. But it doesn't mean I'm actually good at F5. Kind of the same thing. Like I'm better F5 than I am TE. Like I'm better, sorry, I mean I'm better TE than I am F5. But I still end up using F5 a lot because I value it.
All right, because that's where I stand as far as my typing goes. Is that I don't really, I type as an INFJ, but I don't really. I mean, I would say that I'm naturally drawn towards FE stuff. Like,
Mm.
there's a natural draw towards it, but it's like at the same time it's kind of undervalued in my like consciously undervalued, which is kind of strange to say. At the same, it's really hard to express, but like I heavily favor TI over FE in every sense.
Mm.
But still, if you look at quadras, then I'm extremely obviously a beta quadra. Like there's really no question about that. So it doesn't really work to say that I'm an INTP or INTJ, because it's just very obvious that I am in the alpha quadra and that I favor TI over TE. But the FE is like, it's entirely under the surface, as to say. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't show up very much. Like it's I can clearly see it, and like especially if I look at myself as a kid and what I was like as a kid, then it's very obvious. But the older I've gotten, the more subdued it become, and it's really not It's
No, I actually
like almost
understand what you
everyone
mean.
types me as a TI dom, so
Yeah. Yeah, no, I understand what I mean, and I kind of agree with you in the sense that I feel like the older I become, the more FI I have become. And actually, that's one of the things I actually agree with Dorian Nada with. Like, he proposed this idea, that over time you're more likely to become like, the introverted type with the same functions. So an IGA will become more and more like an ISFP over time. And I have been thinking about that. That does kind of match my development experience in the sense that when I was like a kid, I even had this like situation when I didn't really understand what empathy was, and I'm not kidding. Like I was like, "What is empathy?" And everything had to be really, really logical. Like if I thought another person was like saying stuff I thought was stupid, I just called them stupid, and that was it. Like I wouldn't even think about it twice. That just person is stupid, and I wrote them off because they're not logical. And I can still have this kind of weird hiccups where I try to like localize emotions, even though it doesn't really work that way. But I try to like make them make logical sense. Um, but I feel like the older I become, the more I cannot understand emotions. Like I didn't do that before. Like I had this very decisive moment. I think I was like 19 or 20 or something where I'm like, okay, so this is what empathy means. And I'm not kidding. Like I literally thought
mhm.
that I finally understand what empathy means. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, no, for me it was I was over empathetic as a kid, and I've learned just gradually over my life to shut it down because I don't actually. I very rarely value empathy. I mean, I can see uses for it, of course, and well, I can see a lot of uses for it, but usually I think empathy kind of just gets in the way, so I don't really value it at all. So yeah, for me it's definitely been the opposite, that I've just learned how to shut it off. And of course everyone says that that's really unhealthy, but whatever.
Well, I guess it depends on what you mean by empathy and what situation you're talking about. Because when you said that, I was thinking that almost sounds a little bit type 1
Hmm.
to me, in the sense that type 1s don't really like to, have like the subjective feelings model like their decisions. And like, so if they like, would experience empathy at whatever situation, like a normal person, not a type 1 would be like, I'm feeling empathetic moved by this. I want to do this decision instead. A type 1 will say, no, that's wrong. I should not let my empathy cloud my judgment in this situation because then I'm gonna make a decision that is not fair or right.
Yeah, no, that's exactly where I stand. And it's like I like cognitive empathy in the like
Yeah,
understanding where the other person is coming from, but I don't like feeling it. So I appreciate like the empathy of putting yourself in their shoes intellectually, but as much as I can, I don't want to go there emotionally. I see no point doing that. Like unless you're trying to comfort them, I just don't see any use of it whatsoever. Like it's just pointless. All you do is you feel
yeah,
like shit and you make a stupid decision. So I mean, it's just yeah, nah, not a fan of that. And also, there's been a lot of talk about empathy versus compassion, and how empathy is very often it leads you to strange places morally, whereas compassion being just a general love of humanity or whatever, just like
okay,
loving your next, while empathy being those putting yourself in their shoes and feeling. Because what ends up happening is that when you're too empathetic, you constantly go with the underdog. And I think you can see this a lot, like people always favor the one that's in disadvantage because they
hmm,
empathize with them, and then they miss the whole bigger picture of like everyone matters. And that's where the I kind of agree with that. Well, kind of a lot agree with that actually, that compassion just works a lot better compared to empathy when it comes to making decisions. Because empathy really, like, sometimes it just gets really weird with empathy. Like you get it pulls you in some strange directions that just doesn't really make any sense to me, at least.
Okay,
How
yeah,
do you stand on that?
I have a difficult time understanding what you're talking about. I can be very like empathetic as a person, but I've never experienced like my empathy was a problem outside of the fact that maybe sometimes I care a little bit more about people or do a little bit more for them than I really should. Like it really outside my responsibility to do these things.
Mm-hmm.
So I end up like stretching myself a little bit too thin sometimes, and then I can get like frustrated because I don't really get like the reciprocity that I liked for that. It's a little bit type 2-ish, I guess, from that perspective. Um, but for me, the more I've been thinking about this, more like, if I really, really cared, like, in an unconditional kind of way, I wouldn't also expect something in return to, like, have that validation of reciprocity. So, to me, that's like how I approach it more rather than it being a problem because I get carried away with my feelings or something. I never thought about it that way.
Yeah, well, I mean, to contextualize it a little bit better, I guess it's less a problem on an interpersonal level and more when you think about it like socially, because what ends up happening
Okay.
is that it leads to a form of tribalism where whenever you're in a situation when you can empathize with the smaller group, it's gonna skew your judgment because you naturally it's gonna lead to that kind of tribalism. And of course, it's always hard to check your biases, so you're not even gonna realize that you're doing
Yeah.
it. So that's essentially what the problem is, that it leads to this tribalism where you are overly protective, essentially, because of your empathy.
Okay. You mean more like extremism, like
Yeah,
extreme.
yeah, it can lead to extremism, but not even necessarily extremism. I mean, it's just, I mean, it's a form of just tribal of conscious bias. I mean, selective bias or whatever, where you end up in any situation, you only end up seeing it from that one perspective because of your empathy.
Okay.
So you fail to distance yourself
Okay,
and
so
look at
it
it
kind of
from.
like okay, yeah, blends into other ways of okay. I have I think like if it means something like current political climate, like I try to think of it that way, then I can see where you're coming from more. I was like, I was thinking more like I said, individual level, because then I don't really have a problem with it. But yeah, I agree. Like if you like, you know, has social influence as a political leader or something like that, or you just want to have an opinion really on society, of course you need to consider everyone into account, who that is going to affect. Like I had this argument with some guy on Facebook a month or so ago, maybe something like that. Like he was like very staunchly anti-immigrant. I'm not. So that was like the source of disagreement right there. But the reason why I was arguing with him was because he said that it's really as simple as throwing out the immigrants and deny them entrance to the country, and that would solve all problems. And I told him that it's not really that simple. We are not necessarily gonna save more money and create more jobs just because you wanna throw out the immigrants that you think are illegal or not contributing, and you wanna deny entrance to those that want to enter the country right now. Um, and that's because it's like society is too complex to just have like like one singular solution that is gonna solve everything. That it doesn't really work that way. And his problem was more that he cannot deny that, because I do agree with the idea that immigration can be a problem, but you can't just deny people entrance and throw out people that you don't think are contributing. Um, because yeah, it's not that simple, like I mean I can discuss that very lengthily, so I don't know how much detail you want on that.
No, but I actually think Sweden had a really good example of what I'm referring to, where you had this what was it called, equality plowing or whatever, snow plowing, where they started prioritizing plowing the sidewalks before the main roads, because
Right.
and the,
Yeah.
the initial reasoning was because more, well, first of all, that elderly people use it, the
Mm-hmm.
sidewalks, and secondly because more women use the sidewalk than men.
Okay.
But I mean, if first of all, if something happens to a car, people can really die. I mean, especially people on the
Yeah.
sidewalk are in danger. So really, you don't want the roads to be messy. And second of all, if a car stops, then the entire traffic stops. Like all of
Yeah.
it stops there. While if someone slips, yeah, they can hurt themselves, but other people can still walk. So that's an example.
Yeah.
I don't actually think it's a big deal because usually they have the time to plow both, so it's usually not a problem.
Yeah.
It's very rarely actually going to matter. But that's just one example of where they're so focused on the groups or that
Mm-hmm.
they're empathizing with that they just ignore the it doesn't make any sense to plow the sidewalks before you plow the main roads. Like it just
No.
doesn't.
No, I agree that in that sense you kind of need to have priority, where you take like the heaviest traffic route and plow that first, like 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 a highway,
Yeah.
because obviously that's gonna be more a problem if you don't plow it. But I also can kind of understand the point that if you don't plow like the roads with lots of pedestrians walk, and since very icy or whatever, and people like kind of fall and hurt themselves. On the other hand, it's gonna have an impact on, you're gonna have all these people that are gonna have to be driven um, to the emergency clinic, and people are gonna be overworked there, and people that actually really need emergency gonna have to wait longer because the doctors and nurses are not as available as it would. So I mean, from that perspective, I kind of understand that point of view as well, which is why I kind of feel like a lot of the time it's not really that simple when it comes to like decisions concerning society. Uh, but with that said, of course, you need to have a priority system. So you need to like decide which roads are the most important, like as a whole in terms of use. I mean, obviously, you're not gonna go plow some road to some desolate farmer's place. There is only one gravel road there that no one uses. You don't plow that one first because no one uses it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree that it's more important to plow the main sidewalks and the main roads first.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to move on now to let's put typology behind for a second, and well, actually, not. Let's not put it behind, but let's use it as a tangent. So, you said previously that you are a postmodernist, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not by any means well versed in postmodernism, but the criticism, or well, the impression, let's say, that I usually get of postmodernism is a little bit similar to the criticism I have of most of the typology community,
Mm-hmm.
where I'm going to use the typology community here as an analogy. So first you have these patterns of behavior that people notice, right? So, and then you try to find a way of describing them, so cognitive functions, right? And then you create a structure, a model, or whatever to try to find ways of improving your understanding, right? But when you're at this second level, instead of trying to perfect your model and your functions, what people end up doing is that they just add more layers. They just keep going further down. So what you end up with is a bunch of these wacky things that only make sense within the system. But the initial parts, like instead of 90% of the focus being on these initial parts that you were trying to connect to concrete reality, 90% of focus ends up being on these inside system things that are kind of like they don't really make any sense outside of the system. And that's kind of how I feel a lot of the time with postmodernism, is that like there's such a small part that I feel like actually connects to reality, and then there's a whole lot of like wacky inside the system only that, like, unless you actually get inside the system, it doesn't mean anything. Like, it's just meaningless outside the system.
Yeah, no, I agree with you that there's a problem to postmodernism in the sense that it kind of falls, how to say, like at its extreme. It has a tendency to fall into this constant self-criticalism, or how to call it. So, like, you constantly try to point out exactly where you are making biases or errors in your own thinking that you don't really contribute anymore to what you initially wanted to say. So you kind of fall into this kind of almost what to call it, solipsist hole where nothing ends up meaning, like there's no meaning anymore, because it's like, constantly this, I have this bias here, and I have this, and this bias implies that I have this bias, and this bias says I have this bias, and so on and so on. Like it just becomes very, very subjective, and it doesn't really say anything about the reality that you wanted to describe. Um, I'm not that of a hardcore postmodernist. Like I do think my thinking is more naturally leaning that way because that's what I studied. Like that was like the way I was, how to say, indoctrinated to think when I was studying at university. As someone between constructivist and postmodernist, uh, in the sense I prefer a more interpretative way of understanding things, not necessarily a purely quantitative or empiricist. But that doesn't deny the importance of empiricist or quantitative data. In the sense, I do think that postmodernists are more likely typically to say that there probably is no objective reality than they are. And I kind of disagree with that. I'm kind of like in between. I do think
Okay.
there is an objective reality, but like more like a constructivist, I think it's like it's not really something you can really know. So a lot of science is about understanding, in my opinion, that you try to find ways to know this objective reality because actual objective reality is really complex, really multi-layered. There's no way for a human to fully comprehend it. So we have all this kind of methods and theories on how to approach that.
Yeah, I think so. Personally, I kind of view myself as an empiricist. If I don't really like adding any ism labels to myself, but if I have to add one, it would be an empiricist. And the biggest, like, of course, it depends on, but a lot of the postmodernism anyhow that I've come in contact with, they devalue the difference between a model that has predictive capabilities and one that doesn't. And that's of course, as an empiricist, that's where like if a model has predictive capabilities, it's useful, and if it doesn't, it can be useful, but it's probably not that useful. So that's kind of where.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Okay. I see where you're coming from in the sense that you cannot place emphasis on that you want knowledge in itself to be useful. Like you can do something with it. And I guess that's kind of the point that, like the postmodernism, at least, like generally speaking, it's not so focused on it, like knowledge being useful in itself. I think like you have to do something with it as much as the knowledge is more used in the sense that it's supposed to say something else that we haven't considered before. Like it's about more like giving a new perspective or something, changing paradigms of thought, stuff like that. And in that way, I can kind of appreciate it because I think like when you use postmodernist thinking right, how to say, like when it's really good, it's capable, like it's really capable of taking a subjective that we are very familiar with, but it criticizes the way we understand it. So it helps to progress thinking forward because we can see that perhaps we weren't understanding the subject in the way we were supposed to, or because it made us miss out on all this information and all these other ways of seeing that we didn't see because we were viewing the subject incorrectly or in a too limited and narrow-minded way. So I think that's kind of more like a part of postmodernism. It's more like broadening how you think than necessarily being useful in itself. If that makes sense. You can take the results and do something with it. It's more like being critical of yourself and broadening your own view on how you understand reality.
Yeah, but that's basically where the first criticism came from as well, because what ends up happening from my perspective is that there's so much focus on the like analyzing part.
Yeah.
And you create there are all these complex systems created, and all of the focus is on analyzing, but nothing actually gets tied up in a way that you can actually derive a useful principle from it. So whatever it is that you want to do, you can't really use it for anything you want to do because it doesn't go there. Like and that's
no,
where
I agree with you. And when I was like studying for when I was trying to write my PhD proposal, I was reading a lot about gender theory and queer theory because my PhD is about gender. And I'm not familiar with queer theory in the past because I never studied that field before. What I studied anthropology, like social anthropology and sociology. So I'm like a social scientist, but I'm not a queer theorist or anything like that. And I think queer theory, at its worst, really exemplifies what's bad about postmodernism. This is a lot of like psychologizing, and it does it in a way that like the writer style of queer theory itself is very off-putting because it's so like it pays attention to every little detail in the way you write, every word what it means. You end up writing these huge paragraphs alone on the language that you use. And always being mindful of that. And I kind of feel like when you do that, it's a little bit like what is it that you really try to say anymore? Like there is a point there, but the point is getting lost in all this quagmire of constant almost like nitpicking on yourself and how you write and how you think. It doesn't really get anywhere.
Yeah, no, that's like I said, I'm not by any means well versed in postmodernism, but the little I've come in contact with it, that's very often the impression I'm left with is that so much was said but nothing was actually said. Like that's kind of
no, I understand what you mean, and like I said, I think when you do postmodernism right, you can really like change a paradigm of thought in a positive way, so you can actually help to progress that kind of science forward. Like I think like a good example of postmodernism and postmodernist thinking used right is how postmodernist thinking has helped us like in the biological sciences, like in biology, how to think about gender. I think that's one way postmodernist thinking has actually done something right, because like if you look at how biology used to classify gender like 100 years ago, it was man and a woman, and you had them in a penis and a vagina, and that was it. But postmodernist thinking, and with just new and more knowledge in general about the fact that there are more people in the world that think differently than Westerners do when it comes to gender, has helped to like create a much more nice, nuanced understanding that I think is fairer to objective reality than the simpler model that we used to have. So I think that's an example of how it's done the right way. But obviously there are a lot of bad ways too. I think like with every kind of science, or rather like like an approach. Because I think a problem, for example, if you take like the empiricism, is that it's so focused on trying to find something. Like it wants to do something so concrete sometimes, like you kind of forgo all nuance. Like this is how things are, and you don't really question that, if that makes sense. Like it's it's very much to see what you get, and sometimes that's useful. For some sciences that's useful, and sometimes it's not. So I think like the best approach is a little bit of everything, like not too much of something, because too much is always bad.
Yeah, I mean, for me with empiricism, it's more that I view it as an extremely precise tool. It's very small in scope. Like science, which is based on empiricism, is extremely small in scope. Like you can only it's kind of like a scalp. You can only like target tiny pieces of the problem. And so the point for me is just that the little knowledge you get from empiricism there needs to be more emphasis on the facts than on the narrative or whatever, because but of course it's such a small piece of the puzzle, so it's useless otherwise. I think Noam Chomsky put this really well when he was talking about whether AI would reach a point, well, not, but computers, where you just throw in all of the facts you have about a problem, and then it spits out a theory of what is. And his argument was essentially that this is never going to happen, of course, because it's not very hard to see any given topic. You can add in 1,000 useless facts just like that that doesn't have any impact whatsoever on what it is you're trying to understand.
Yeah.
So it's without models and understanding and rational stuff like that, it's useless.
Yeah.
So it's not that I think that empiricism is like the end and all. I think it's a very small part, actually. I think it's very small part, but it's the small part that needs to be emphasized and needs to, and you need to try to tie things to it as much as you can. So that's just essentially where I stand. Okay, but
no, I understand what you mean. And like you said, I mean, like example with AI or computers being able to like create a model, simply by inputting a lot of facts and data. You know, the thing about like computers, they don't have like like intuitive understanding of reality like humans do. And that's kind of like the problem, like you say, with empiricism. Because what you see is what you get, and that's it.
Yeah. So I think this is you already mentioned a little bit, but let's talk a little bit about gender, and especially I think it's interesting from a typology perspective, because there isn't really any support for a heavy nature in gender in the academics of of gender being almost all nature. That's not really there's not really a respectable position for that. But Jung, when you really start interpreting, he is extremely heavy nature with his archetypes, and everything kind of falls down to nature. So what's your perspective on that, and on nature and Jung's interpretation of it?
I think like when it comes to Jung, like I mentioned to you before also, but when it comes to Jung as a person, you need to put him into perspective, like his historical perspective. Like, Jung comes from a time that is very, like, the way they understand gender, sex, and sexuality is very different from what we do now. Like, his view was a lot more binary and much more simplistic. So he tried to explain it based on that worldview or experience that he had, which pretty much meant that he thought like when it comes to sexuality, for example, sexuality is like, to him, is just the result of your anima or animus, like the archetype, and that is projected onto the appropriate person that fits that archetype. So if you have like an anima for men, and then you're heterosexual and you're attracted to women, and the kind of woman that you're attracted to depends on the archetype that is projected. So he wrote a lot more about this, virgin, whore, Madonna, and mother, crone, the like different developments, different images, and there's a women and then a man. But anyway, he wrote about that, and he hypothesized that a man with an unhealthy he has an unhealthy idea what women are, like archetypically. For example, he thinks like he only dates women that are very young, he thinks are slutty, very sexual, stuff like that. It's because he has an unhealthy view of women in his mind, so he only thinks of women as like whores or whatever, like that it fits the archetype of a whore. So that's why he's only dating those kinds of women, because he does not recognize that there are other women to date, pretty much. So he projects that anima on women that finds them attractive. And similarly, Jung thought that homosexuals are caused when you have like the wrong anima or animus. So if you're a homosexual man, it means that instead of having an anima that you have and that you project as an archetype when you're heterosexual as a man, you have an animus. Wait, I'm thinking, you have an animus instead, which is the main equivalent of anima. So you project instead an image of men onto other men, and you find that attractive. And then you also had this idea about the inferior function and being a source of attraction in other people. So if you, for example, recognize people that you think represent your inferior function in some way, you are likely to project that and feel more attracted to those people. And that's pretty much the original idea behind duality in sociologics. Um, what was your really question again? I kind of
No,
lost this.
no, I was really just curious about your perspective when it comes to gender and young, and just in general how you felt about it. Uh,
Yeah, okay.
'Cause
Well, I think my view on Jung and gender is that he's outdated pretty much.
yeah, yeah,
Like, he was trying to rationalize something that you didn't have so much knowledge about at the time. Another thing about Jung's writing is that he's actually really, really sexist from a modern perspective. That is, from his perspective, he probably thought he was pretty equal in how he saw and viewed and approached women. And the fact that they even tried to address things like homosexuality, various and the various forms of attraction, I guess in itself for the time he wrote and thought these things is fairly progressive, seeing how homosexuality was pretty much condemned around the time he was the most active. So in some ways, yeah, I mean, you can say he was progressive for his time, but compared to now, he's very, very outdated. And a lot of his ideas don't really hold much scientific water, like the whole thing about anima and animus. Like now we know that homosexuality is largely biological. Like your sexuality is determined by your brain structure, pretty much. Which pretty much contradicts the idea that it's something to do with complexes and archetypes and projections. Like there's probably some grain of truth in that who we are attracted to, is related to, ideal images of men and women in our heads. But our sexuality is not rooted in that.
right, yeah, because I just find it interesting because I mean, there's also when it comes to culture as well, there's the heavy nature versus nurture debate,
Mm-hmm.
and how much, and again, Young, when you listen to a lot of when you listen to a lot of people who are heavily into Young, and when you really put his ideas into perspective, you kind of get culture being nothing but the product, well, a successful culture at least being nothing but the product of successful archetypes. So a good
Yeah,
culture is something that adheres to these different, like the heroic archetype or whatever, and a bad
yeah,
culture is, and so it falls extremely heavily on the nature side, and there just doesn't seem to be a lot
yeah.
of
Okay,
support
you
for
mean
that.
yeah, you almost mean like something like memes, like like social memes, like
Yeah,
the way Dawkins thinks of culture, like there's almost like a biological imperative to human thinking and the way society evolves.
yeah, but of course, yeah, but Jung's would be the ultimate meme then, like, because
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's a lot more, because Dawkins only talks about it in like micro scale, while
yeah,
the Jung interpretation is really macro scale, and
yeah,
everything relates
yeah,
back to
because
the archetypes.
because that's this collective unconscious theory.
Yeah,
The thing about the collective unconscious is that I think, I mean, there's a reason why the main reason why Jung is not heavily endorsed in modern psychology and the psychological community right now is part because of the collective unconscious theory being very, very dubious. Because while I do think he has a point in the sense that he kind of shares um, the thinking of structural anthropologists and sociologists from the 40s and 50s, like French thinkers like Claude Lévi-Strauss, in the sense that there is some kind of, like if you study cultures across the world, you will find that there are a lot of similar elements to our storytelling and our societies, even though they can be very different in other ways. Like it's same body underneath, but different clothes, kind of thing. Like it looks very different, but there's like the core essence of the idea is the same at some level. Um, I kind of find it dubious to buy into the that this is caused by some collective archetype that stores all human experience that they ever and all human thought that is kind of stored into some great blob of existence. I don't know what to call it. Like it's kind of problematic. So I do kind of get where it's coming from, because this idea is very very Eastern. Like it's very Eastern philosophical thinking, and Jung is very very inspired by his travels when he went to India and China, Japan, or wherever he now went. Like he's very inspired by Buddhism and stuff like that. And you can see that a lot in this thinking, and this idea of the collective conscious, I think, is very Buddhist or very like Eastern philosophy, spirituality kind of attitude. Um, but the problem is that when you take it to like a scientific point of view, how are you gonna prove this, or how are you gonna study this?
Yeah.
And you don't really like you can't.
Yeah, and actually, like, at least where neuroscience stands right now, compared to other animals, the human brain seems to be a lot more. There seems to be a lot more pre-programming in the human brain
Yeah,
compared to other animals. So actually, where neuroscience stands today, it's kind of counter to the archetypes in that certainly
yeah,
there are a lot of things that are pre-programmed. We have some kind of grammatical structure. I mean, some kind of
yeah,
predisposed
yeah.
some things so we
And
can understand language, but like everything or almost everything being pre-programmed, like um, doesn't really seem supportive. We seem to.
yeah, no, no, yeah, I agree, and that can also lean towards like in neuroscience kind of route as well explanation, in the sense that I think that whatever similarities it is that we experience has more to do with the fact that um, we're all kind of human, like we're all humans. So we have that like we share the same body structure, like the same kind of brain structure. So it's more like a similarity of coincidence than a similarity because it was meant to be. Because I think that's another thing with Jung is that when you say that all of these things are caused by a collective unconscious, it almost points towards a creator, like someone implanted these things into human beings and are born.
Yeah, well, that would
Um,
be DNA then, I suppose, like
yeah,
just passed on through. But then
yeah,
again, that's what neuroscience doesn't seem to support right now.
no, no, I agree, and but I mean the main problem with Jung's argument is that what is the collective unconscious, and where does it come from? Because what he's proposing is that it's one thing when you talk about the DNA or we're talking about neuroscience. It's something physical, like it's inside, like it's a part of our, like it's a physical imprint in our bodies. But the collective unconscious is, like it says, it's unconscious, it's more like a spiritual thing. It's not really a part of the physical or material world. And I think that's kind of like where the theory begins to break apart a lot. Um, because while I do think sometimes psychology kind of like flirts with philosophy in a lot of ways, like I don't know if you're familiar with humanism, like the humanism branch of psychology, which is a lot more about self-development, self-fulfillment, self-satisfaction. How do I become a happy person?
I mean, not familiar, but I've come across it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I mean, these things are also kind of like spiritual questions in a way. How do I develop, become a better person at who I am, and so on. But um, I think John kind of takes it to the next level. Like he doesn't just like flirt with spirituality. Like his thinking is definitely like his theories are definitely spiritual at some level, which is a little weird because he also said that um, he really wanted his he really wanted to be scientific about it.
Yeah.
Even though he also kind of hated it at the same time. I'm not sure if you read chapter 10,
No,
but
I haven't.
Jung has this thing about he has this innate hatred towards TE. Like it's ridiculous. Like it seems like almost it's an entire root of evil, and it shows in particular in his attitude towards science at the time. I mean, if we think that today we're too postmodernist, I guess science, when John was most active, was too empiricist. Everything has to be tried and proven, and everything has to be about facts, models that can be recreated and reproduced, and so on. And he just hated that. He thought it was too conformist, and didn't say all that much. Like it needed to be a bit more novel, a bit more out of the box thinking. So he kind of like, that's why his ideas are kind of the way they are, I guess, because they're kind of difficult to prove. Because you can't really like test in a way what is TE. You can't really like quantify it.
No, but yeah, but I think that's also largely a problem of the community, that it hasn't been tried. People haven't actually tried to put it in terms so that it can be tested, because I don't think it's impossible to actually put it in terms, because all you need is for it to start predicting outcomes, and then you can start testing, does that happen or not. So you just need to get it to the point where it's predictive, and then you can test if that prediction comes true or not. But it's never really been pushed to that, because as I said, people tend to somehow more enjoy just going deeper and deeper, and instead of actually hammering on the fundamentals, which they just buy.
Yeah. And clearly also there is something, since I mean we keep seeing the pattern that we can say this person is a TE type. Clearly there is some level of predictability to that, because if there will be no such a pattern, then we couldn't predict it. We can never say whether a person is a TE type or an FI type or whatever.
Yeah, so it's all about finding a way to express those patterns we're seeing in such a way that we can make a prediction and test them. So I don't think it's impossible. I just think people, because it's obviously, it's really hard, and that's why science is such it's a sculpt, it's such a narrow thing. It tests for such a tiny thing, and it's really hard, and it's a nuisance to do, really. It's not fun, it's rigorous, and really it's boring, but it can definitely be done. It's just people haven't really tried.
I mean, I think the biggest problem with like youngsters or MBTI in general is that it tries to like create, like, because it's about cognition, it's about how people think. But cognition is not necessarily material concrete in itself, in that you can easily quantify it. So you need to find out a way how you actually quantify it. Like one way you can do it is brain scans, like Nordy does it. That's definitely a legitimate way. It's also possible to like map it to language, how people speak. Is there like a particular speech structure that INFP uses? So you can record a sample of 100 INFPs and how they speak, and then you can match it to see if there's a level of accuracy, and you can predict that if people speak that way, they're an INFP. You can maybe do it with body language as well.
Yeah, and then you can connect
a combination of all these things.
Yeah, and then you can try to connect this. You can try to connect the writing with the brain scan with all of the different levels, and as long as you actually find these patterns, then you're on the right track. But there's very little done on this. So that's really my biggest problem with the typology community, is that these things are just bought, and then people just go deeper and deeper into theory, and they start talking about introverted loops and stuff like that. And I don't like I think the introverted loop is stupid, but I don't really care about it, because if you're stuck in your head, then what you need to do is go out and get external stimuli and engage with the world, and that's what they say you should do. It's just when you do it from a level of analysis like that, people are just gonna, how do I engage my NE? How do I engage my FE? And they're just gonna get even more stuck in their head, instead of just, okay, so I need to just get some external stimuli.
That's a fair point. Yeah, I actually didn't think so much about it that way, but that's a very fair point. The thing is also about the loop theory, which I don't understand, is that first of all, it's not an official MBTI theory. Like everyone who thinks that official MBTI theory and is expressed by unofficial like MBTI theorists, they need to get the facts straight, because it's not. This theory, this loop theory, is created like by a person on Personality Cafe several years ago. This guy made a thread where he came up like it's just typical ENTP. Also, this guy types an ENTP. He came up with this idea. He makes a thread where he connects various psychological problems like borderline, narcissism, stuff like that, to the cognitive loops. So he thought, like, for example, an INTP is gonna be narcissistic because they have NENFE or whatever. It makes them lacking empathy, or I don't know, whatever he connected it to. But it's very, very typical ENTP thinking, I think, to do this. And for some reason, this theory got really popular, kind of caught on, and now people think this is actually something negative, and this is a negative theory, but it's not. It's just typical ENTP doing a typical ENTP thing, which is trying to connect two very separate ideas together and see what people think about it.
Yeah,
pretty much.
Yeah, and like the problem is when you get these kinds of theories, is all of a sudden people turn to this for like they have a problem and they're gonna be like, oh,
yeah,
how do I engage my NE? How do I engage my NI? And it's just you realize that all of this is just theoretical nonsense with no like. You have no reason to listen to it, like none whatsoever. And it's, of course you can try it out, I mean, that's fine, but it's just, it gets really cloudy and usually probably doesn't actually help the person at all, so.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is also, while I can kind of understand this whole thing about how do I think more in terms of expansion, the people kind of suggest these things doesn't really in the end actually know you to engage this function in the first place, because it's like, you know, if you want to like engage NE, you need to change the way you think, right? You can't just say you should go read more books. Okay, if you want to engage NE, you need to begin to try to think in terms of possibilities. You need to think in terms of options, of interpretations, connecting external events together. And either you do this naturally because you're an intuitive type, or you don't. And that's pretty much it. Like, you can probably with very great practice eventually kind of get like an ability where you can like temporarily switch your condition around and do something you find you're normally not so good at, or something unnatural to you. But you're gonna find so much like it's so difficult, especially when it's something you don't like and you suck at, that you're probably just gonna quit halfway through, and you will eventually fall back into your own pattern anyway.
Yeah, and I also think that just when it comes to, say, engaging an extroverted function, if we express it like that, that it's pretty obvious that what you need to do is to actually go out there and deal with the external world, because if you don't have a lot of information, you're not gonna have any information to draw connections between. Meanwhile, if you're constantly bombarded with new information because you're putting yourself out there constantly, then you're naturally going to draw more connections. I mean, it's naturally going to happen because you have so much more information and you don't have the time to process all of it. So there's gonna be more shallow, broad connections automatically drawn, regardless. So I mean, there's little point to overcomplicate and think it the same way. If you have a problem with goals, then just set any kind of goal and start working towards it. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that. You just need to start.
Yeah, and I think another thing with the loop theory that I don't like is that, you know, I do think people can like cognitively end up in, like, you say, like, you're using TI more, like you want to use more TI than FE, or like I use FI more than I use TE. I know people can end up like doing stuff like that, but that doesn't mean it's bad. Like, first of all, it doesn't mean it's bad. Secondly, it's you know, why should you change it? And what's the problem with it? Because I think like the idea itself is that there's a problem with this is kind of stupid in itself. Either you think in a certain way or you don't. And maybe if we're talking about something like depression, where people like, you know, they get like this ego dystonic ways of viewing themselves to reality, you know, like I'm a terrible person, or I will never accomplish anything, or the world is just bad and I'm not gonna do anything. You know, you have like very destructive thinking patterns. Then I kind of understand the reason why you need to change them. But generally speaking, I don't think there is a reason, for example, for an INFJ to use TI less. Because what is the point of that? Either you use TI or you don't.
Yeah.
And there might be sometimes situations, okay, FE will probably be better, but why should you like you try to think about whether you're using FE or TI? Because that's not really how cognition works anyway. It happens like naturally.
Yeah. Yeah, but I do also think that when it comes to like depression, and it's kind of a pet peeve when people turn to, I don't like people turning to the Enneagram or the MBTI or anything like that when it comes to, say, depression,
Yeah,
because I mean, what you need to understand is, of course, that it's actually physical, like it's a chemical imbalance,
yeah,
and you need to simply think of it like you can't just think yourself out of it. You actually need to, if anything, you need to do things just to get your body balance fixed, and that might mean maybe try to exercise, maybe change your diet. You know, it's impossible to say anything, but like just turning to a system doesn't, especially one that isn't
no,
really empirically solid, it just seems irresponsible. Like
yeah,
it's
and yeah, and I think like that's kind of actually one of my really big pet peeves when it comes to typology in general is that people over ascribe things to typology. Like one of the most common questions you see is, I have a relationship problem. I know this person and I like this person and they don't treat me this and this that way, or I used to be in a relationship with this person and now they act in this and that way. And why is that? I think they're an INTJ, or I think they're a type 8, or I think they're a type 2 ENTP, or whatever. And you know, typology doesn't help you with this. This is not a typology kind of problem. Um, because your relationship, there's no way we on a forum or whatever is ever gonna fully understand your relationship in the first place, and what happened and why you have this problem. And then whatever problem that you have is likely not even explained by typology, but because you guys don't know how to communicate. And the only way for you to actually communicate is to speak to each other, but you are not talking to each other when you ask these questions on the forum. Like, why is this person behaving that way? Well, we don't know. You don't know either. Maybe you should go ask them, and now you have your answer. That's really how simple it is.
yeah, yeah, and I mean any interpersonal relationship has a whole bunch of dynamics that you can't predict that are
Yeah,
entirely based on your experiences with each other. So even if MDI was 100% legit in every way, then it still couldn't do it because of those unique experiences that create a unique dynamic between the two of you. So
yeah,
I mean, no, I entirely agree that is something that I also dislike about it.
yeah,
I wanted to finish off just mentioning a little bit about how you feel about gender stereotypes, since usually postmodernist gets kind of arbitrarily thrown into the camp where they want to entirely eliminate all forms of gender stereotypes, actually all forms of stereotypes in general. But where do you
yeah,
stand on that?
yeah. That's actually one of my pet peeves with queer theory is that they try so hard to deconstruct uh, gender, including gender stereotypes, to the point, um, it's kind of like this thing that everything that's different is to be hallmarked, you know. Like if you like change a little bit, that's not stereotype, then that's good to the point that in itself, becomes like a stereotype in a way. You know what I mean? Um, and that really annoys me because first of all, I don't understand what's wrong whether someone is stereotype or not stereotype. I think it's entirely up to people and who you feel comfortable to be like. You know, uh, I'm fairly stereotype in the sense that I identify myself as a binary person. I don't think I'm like a non-binary. Like I want to stand outside, being a gender identity or whatever that's outside typically what you think when you think of a man, pretty much. And I like that. Of course, then I'm aware of the fact that I am, and that's perfectly fine with me. I think like when it comes to gender and it comes to like stereotypes and power and discrimination, it's more important that you know who you are and you actually choose that than doing something because you think you should be that way and you don't value it, or you are a certain way without knowing that you are. For example, say like a guy, he's very like sexist, but he doesn't understand that he is. Um, and if he doesn't understand that he is, how can he change it? You know. But if he chooses to be sexist, okay, well that's his choice. But then he also has to accept the fact and deal with that people will disagree with him, and that's different. You know, because he actually chooses to be that way and identify being that way, and why people don't have to like it, it is still his choice. Whereas if he doesn't understand, then try to tell him to change it is kind of useless too, because he doesn't understand that he is. It's the same thing. Like I think the most important thing is that you're aware that you are something, and that you actively choose it. And if there is a problem, then you can say, okay, but this is who I want to be, so it is my choice. And either I can change that or I don't.
Do you even think that it's possible to eliminate stereotypes, or do you think that it's impossible to even do that?
No, and I don't even think that's desirable. Like to eliminate all stereotypes. Personally, I don't think
would you think it's possible?
No, I don't. First of all, like logically speaking, it's not possible because I mean, a stereotype is essentially a conglomerate. You take all the people of a certain group or cat, and then and like I mean, it's like on a statistical scale. Eventually, everyone is gonna fall on like this kind of bell curve, and then you have like the stereotype. All the people that fit on the middle of the bell curve, the top, then the stereotype, and then you have like more and more outliers like that. And it doesn't matter what social group you're talking about. You can take any sample of a social group, and you will find that whatever trait or attitude or whatever you're measuring, they're gonna fall like this on a bell curve. And that's just how humans are. And we are gonna say that this here, that is in the middle of the bell curve, is the stereotype. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that per se. That people naturally are a little collectivist, I guess. And that just makes perfect sense because we don't grow up, like individuals separate from society. We are a part of a society with social influence. We are influenced by our parents, by our peers, by society as a whole. Like we went to school, even though it's kind of, I don't like to think of it that way, like say it that way, but you do get kind of indoctrinated from your schooling. Like it does try to influence your thinking and what you think is right and wrong. And I mean, those things aren't bad per se, as long as you're aware that this is happening to you and you're okay with it. It's one thing, if you realize, like these kids that grew up in very religious homes, and then they later realized they were atheists, and they kind of feel bad for the fact that their family or their parents or community didn't give them the choice to be atheists if they wanted to. They were just told that they have to be religious, and that's kind of like what I mean a little bit. It's one thing if you're actively aware of your like your thinking, your choices. Like you can be religious, you can be a fanatic and religious to me all you want, as long as you know that you are, and you choose that, because people are given that choice. And then if people criticize you for it, then you can also say, but this is what I choose to be, I stand for this, as opposed to someone that is forced into that, because then they can't even say that they stand for it, because they don't even know what they actually stand for, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I just wanted to add one thing when you mentioned the bell curve. That is, you didn't mention, but it was implied by what you said, and that is that the reason why it matters that we fall in a bell curve is because of when you think about how humans process information, we think, I mean, if you think about what a tree is, you don't actually memorize every part of what a tree is. You have a rough model of what a tree is.
Yeah.
The same as with an apple. We don't have the capability of, with that bell curve, of actually
Yeah.
processing the entire thing and keeping all of the nuances. We can't do that. Instead, what we end up doing is, of course, making that we see that split, and that's how we process
Yeah.
it, because it's not possible for us to just
Yeah.
all the details that are necessary for to make a tree. I mean, that's what they
Yeah.
try to do in science, but it's not possible for us. We wouldn't function if we had to do that with everything. Is this a chair? And then you had to go through everything, because it takes
Yeah.
too long.
Yeah.
So that's like why it matters that it's in a bell curve, because the way we process information means we automatically make a stereotype out of it. We have no other choice, because we
Yeah.
can't process all that information separately. It's just not possible.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, like I said, I don't think there's a problem with that as long as you know that you function that way. Like, for example, I try to not be sexist or discriminating towards other people, regardless of gender or race or whatever. Like, I try to think about that. But it doesn't mean that I will never be discriminating, because there will be situations where I will be unknowingly aware that I do things that may hurt other people, that is considered discriminating or belittling or whatever. And it's kind of like and it becomes a problem when I do it without knowing. Um, but if I do it and I am knowing and I don't want to do something about it, then that is still my choice. And I'm being a dickhead, but it's still my choice to be a dickhead. But if I want to do something about it, I need to first be aware that I am. Um, and then you can say, I know that I am this way. I don't want to do something about it, and that's okay. But now that I know that I am, I can also do something about it. And I don't know, it doesn't have to be more complicated than that when it comes to discrimination. I think like the most important thing is that you are aware that you are behaving in a certain way, and this is how it should be like.
Yeah, and I also think it's important to realize that discrimination, as in preferencing one thing over something else in some way, that's not always bad. I mean,
No,
it doesn't
like
have to be bad.
no, and like I said, if you do something that other people take issue with, but you know that this is what you choose, yeah, you would have to deal with the consequence of people take issue with it, of course, and the criticism of that, and then you have the choice then to consider if you think that criticism is valid and you should change and improve it, or if it's not, then you dismiss it. Um, but the first thing is that you should be aware that this is something that you choose. I think I don't know. It's just I don't know how to explain. It's just very important because you can have like an entire social group that's discriminatory towards another social group without knowing that there are. But they cannot change their behavior, before they actually know that they are. And then some people anyway will choose to be that way. But you cannot take away that choice from them and say that they should not be that way, because that's kind of wrong too. They should always have that choice to be stereotype or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as they choose it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't entirely agree in that. I think that there are behaviors that, I mean, I don't like. I think you don't think someone should be violent just because they want to be violent, as an example.
No.
So I mean, I do draw distinctions where.
Yeah. Okay.
I do
yeah.
think there's
okay,
a point
sure.
where behaviors are just simply socially unacceptable, and that's like if you just need to fuck off from that society if you want to do that.
No,
Much.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
So,
but I mean, yeah.
But yeah, otherwise, I mean, I agree that it's important that you walk the walk, essentially, or that you own what you're doing. That you like. It's important both for you and for the people around you that you actually do that. So I do think that that's important, especially for yourself, to really.
Yeah. And I also think that when you force yourself into a role for the sake of it, pretty much, regardless of whether you like it or not, it tends, I think, to create a lot of insecurity, because firstly, this role may not be something that you enjoy. You may enjoy some parts, but not other parts. you don't feel that you have the right to choose what parts that it is that you want to be, and it makes, and I think a lot of, like, especially like if we talk about male insecurity, which is like something that I enjoy a lot, because I see like it's very, very common. Like, a lot of men feel very insecure because they try to live up to this idea of being masculine, without understanding that they actually have a choice in how masculine they want to be, like in, relationship to this role. Um, and I think that's a problem itself too. And then they kind of like act in ways that is kind of discriminatory too, because they want to prove to themselves that they are masculine, when they could just be more confident with themselves and who they are. And
Yeah.
we don't have to live up to the stereotype. And if you want to live up to this part of the stereotype, that's perfectly okay. Like if you talk about gender anyway.
Yeah, but I do think that there's a point to having that people almost never mention, in that the so-called feminine and the masculine stereotype, they often actually balance each other out. And I think that that's important, because the same thing as we mentioned with processing information, whenever you have a decision to make, you can't possibly factor in everything. Like, you can't actually make a
No.
logical decision and factor in everything. So you need a starting point. And
Yeah.
so here's where gender stereotypes, if you have two different ones where balance each other out, can actually be really beneficial, because it's not very hard to create a scenario in your head where something happens, okay, and so the masculine stereotype here would be that you need to suck it up and just work through it, right? So
Yeah.
you need to keep going, right? And it's not
Yeah.
very hard to create a scenario in which you actually have to keep going, so you need someone that does that. And then the feminine stereotype here is that nurturing, and you need to process it, and obviously there's truth to that as well, and when you combine them, you get a balancing. And so I think that from a societal perspective, they can be very useful still, because they very often balance each other out. That doesn't mean, of course, that there aren't bad aspects to either one that
No.
could be improved, but just there can also be positive aspects where they help
Yeah.
balance each other out and help people make decisions in a way that just benefits society.
Yeah. What you said now also was so fucking beta as well. Like, every beta has this idea. I'm not sure why beta has this. Like, only betas have this ideas of gender. But this is so fucking beta. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you in principle in the sense that yes, if you want to be like that, I don't see a problem with that. As long as you're aware that you are. And the problem is more, when a person does not want to be like that. They feel like they have to be like that, and it just makes them unhappy.
Yeah, no, I
So they
agree.
should have this. Yeah, so they should have the freedom to choose to not be like that. But if you want to be like that, that is not my issue, because
Yeah.
then you choose it.
Yeah,
And
I do agree that I think there should be less pressure of it should be understood that it is less of a pressure to be that way and more of a suggested way,
yeah,
But
yeah,
I mean,
like I said, I do think that this pressure creates a lot of insecurity in people.
yeah, I agree.
But I also think it creates insecurity if you try to force people the other way. Because even though you can talk about the freedom of roles, it's like it still becomes like a binary. You have like a stereotype role. You should be that way. Okay, that's bad. You should not be stereotyped, and that becomes the role of being not stereotyped. You're not really free from a role. You still like force yourself in two different directions.
Yeah, no, I agree. So, I think this is a good place to end the conversation.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for being here. It was a really enjoyable conversation.
Okay. No, thank you. If you wanna, yeah, you can show me off your upload. I would really like to look at it later.
Yeah, I will. So, thanks again. And,
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
later.